Hello, I'm Janeth Aleman-Tovar, an assistant professor at Fresno State, and thank you for watching my video. Today, we will be reviewing the teaching advocacy practical strategies for pre-service teachers. Here's the agenda for this presentation. We'll begin with quick introductions, historical overview of advocacy efforts by families. So, what have families done to support individuals with disabilities? Then we will walk through a course activity that you can complete with pre-service teachers. I'll share resources and references and also provide a link for any questions. The objectives of this presentation are first to provide you with a historical overview of advocacy efforts by families of children with disabilities. If you are not familiar with, hopefully you will walk out with knowing what have been the efforts by families to ensure that students with disabilities receive free and appropriate public education. Then I will present an advocacy course activity that you can include in your courses. So, introductions, if this was an in-person presentation, we would share your name and then I would have you identify a local, state, or national issue related to special education. So, for my name is Janeth Aleman-Tovar, and an issue that I am concerned about is special education teacher shortage, right? I'm very concerned about the quality of instruction that students with disabilities are receiving where when there is a teacher shortage, are they qualified to support our students? So, right, so if this was a course, again, we would all do introductions because we know the icebreakers, introductions, build a community. And then in the course, I would begin with a historical overview of advocacy efforts by families. What have they done in the past to ensure that students with disabilities receive free, appropriate public education? Before 1975, majority of children with disabilities in the United States were either excluded from public school or received education services that were inappropriate. This was before 1975. Doesn't feel like that long ago. So to change this, families advocated for special education policy, right? Parents wanted their children to be included, to receive education with their peers with non-disabilities. So their advocacy efforts really laid the foundation for federal legislation ensuring educational rights for students with disabilities. In the 1970s, there were landmark cases, Park versus Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and Mills Fish Board of Education of the District of Columbia. Both cases established that children with disabilities were entitled to a free and public education. These cases led to the groundwork for the Education for All Handicapped Children Act of 1975, which was later reauthorized to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, which you may be more familiar with. Again, if we had more time, if we were in class, I would click on the link videos related to court cases. And this shares the history of both of those cases, specifically interviews with families from that were part of the Park versus Commonwealth of Pennsylvania case. So again, the Education for All Handicapped Children Act of 1974 was signed into law, and this was really focusing on the issue of access and opportunity, right? Ensuring that students with disabilities received free and public education. There were amendments after that, 1990, 97, 2004 was the last amendment. Every time the law was amended, the focus shifted. And so now we're really looking into issues of quality, making sure that the education that students receive is of high quality. There's accountability, and there's outcomes, right? What are the outcomes for students with disabilities? Are we improving those outcomes? So again, the last reauthorization was in 2004, so a little bit over 20 years. if math doesn't fail me. And so this is problematic, right? It hasn't been reauthorized. There's changes that need to be made. And so again, if this was a course, we would, or as an instructor, I would assign these readings and these videos for you to watch to become more familiar with the initial law of 1975 that allowed students with disabilities to be to receive a free and appropriate public education. And so, as you remember, the law has been amended with titles, the name of the name of the law changed to IDEA. And here are some of the examples or some of the changes that have been made in each of those amendments. For example, in 1990, the autism and traumatic brain injury disabilities were added. So again, before 1990, if a child had autism, they didn't qualify because it wasn't under one of those qualifying disabilities. In 1990, mandated transition services were added, so we had to begin discussing transition services, transition planning. In 1997, a regular education teacher is a member of the IEP team. So now we have to include a GE teacher in the IEP team. And so again, these were all based on support or increased changes from researchers, parents, suggestions, and that's why these amendments were made to the law. So the principles of IDEA are six, and with a focus on zero rejects. So we have to enroll students with disabilities when their disability adversely impacts their educational performance, protection and evaluation. So if a student has a qualifying disability, they will receive s- det- so if a student has a disability, it has been determined through an assessment, then they will need special education services. The third principle is free, appropriate public education. Least restrictive environment includes students with disabilities in a general education setting. Again, this is an important law, right? And especially if you teach students or pre-service general education teachers, oftentimes they don't understand why a student with disability needs to be in their classroom. So you can point them back to the federal law IDEA and the principle of least restrictive environment. Then there is the procedural due rights that the school and parents must comply with the procedures of IDEA with for example, the assessment timeline of 60 days. And another important principle of IDEA is parent participation. School professionals and parents are to collaborate, which does not always happen. But again, this is a principle of IDA. And so there is a link that I will add to this presentation so you could learn more about IDEA. And so again, as you remember, IDA hasn't been amended since 2004. And so it's important to start thinking about what changes do we want to see in this law when it's amended. Do we know when that will be? No. But it's important for us researchers, pre-service teachers, for us teacher educators to be prepared to make those suggestions, right? And so here is a link to an article which we conducted a parent training and one part of that parent training was focus groups in which we asked parents, what changes do you want to see? And parents also created videos describing the changes that they want to see. And so I recommend that you take a time to navigate this website, but you can look for videos based on English or Spanish language. You could look for videos related to transition and for videos related to different states. So, for example, if you're looking for transition, Illinois, you will find this video of a mother, which the theme of this video is increased diversity of classes, help parents understand the law better, provide documentation so parents understand it and it isn't repetitive. So again, this parent is discussing her suggestions for the next reauthorization of IDEA. We could look to see Massachusetts. If you do English, you you would have a few more options. But here, for example, we have one parent in New Mexico that she is recommending teacher training, keeping parents involved after student turns 18. Another parent is recommending for the next authorization required parent advisory groups in each school district, parent liaisons in school districts. So again, here would be a great activity for you to share with your pre-service teachers. Let's explore this article and then let's watch the videos. What do parents want to see? Because that's ultimately what the activity that we will create in this presentation is. Students or pre-service teachers will make suggestions for the next reauthorization of IDEA or perhaps select a problem unrelated to IDEA. So we just covered some of those historical important facts of the advocates, families advocacy efforts that have supported the changes for students with disabilities. Now we are going to review the course advocacy activity. So this is an activity that you can implement in your course. So here are the learning objectives. It's really to summarize the efforts of families, which led to the passage of Education for All Handicapped Children Act. We also want students in our course to identify their House and Senate representatives, to identify disability organizations that promote advocacy, and then to develop an outline to communicate with a representative. So for them to learn to how to advocate, how to call, how to send an email to their representative. And as a very important as a course instructor, you should not, well, you really should not make this activity of contacting their representative worth points, right? Because we know some of our students are undocumented, perhaps are not citizens, so they are not allowed to or may not feel comfortable contacting their representatives for various reasons. Maybe their family members are undocumented. And so, again, this is an activity where you want to share this with students up front. We are going to discuss advocacy. We are going to discuss different forms of advocacy. However, I am aware that maybe some students do not feel comfortable doing this. So it is an optional activity. It is so you become aware of strategies. And so here is the outline for the course activity. First, you will begin with providing students with a historical overview of advocacy efforts by families of children with disabilities. You will have students review timelines. And so these are three different timelines that focus on individuals with disabilities, life before the passage of IDEA and life after the passage of IDEA. I've had students review these timelines, and they're always so surprised by, unfortunately, everything that individuals with disabilities have had to encounter. And so this activity allows them to see the life of an individual with disabilities outside of a school setting and a historical overview. So you have students select one of these timelines, or you can select one of the timelines that you prefer. And then with a partner, have students reflect on the timeline. What is one new fact you learned? What surprised you about this timeline? You'll be very surprised by their new fact and what was surprising to them. Then you will review the different principles of IDEA and how they relate to the students you're teaching. If you're teaching students with general education or in a general that are going to be general education teachers, you will probably discuss the least restrictive environment. You can also have them read more about what IDEA, the different components of IDEA. You will also have them review the article about the suggestions for IDEA. You can have a short activity where they view different parent videos and have them reflect on this, right? A lot of the videos or a lot of the parents suggested more parent training or more teacher training to work with students with disabilities. How does that make them feel, right? If the parents are suggesting teachers aren't prepared to work with students with disabilities and they are the future teachers, do they agree, disagree? What changes would they want to see? And then have students reflect. How did the actions of families advocating for their children change educational opportunities for students with disabilities? So have them really think about the advocacy efforts of families and how did they impact students, right? Have them think about, what if families hadn't advocated? Where do you think students with disabilities would be now, right? And then have them complete this advocacy activity. Again, I cannot state how important it is for an instructor to share that this is an optional activity, that this is an activity that there will be no points associated to it, because you do not want a student to feel that because of their citizenship status, they are less than or they won't be able to receive those points. So you're going to start the lesson or the activity by asking them, identify a local, state, or national issue that you want to address. And here are some example paraprofessional shortages. If you work with special education teachers, you will often hear my paraprofessional was out. We weren't able to get a substitute. We're still trying to hire a paraprofessional, and this impacts their classroom, right? So this might be a huge issue for some of your students. There might be their concern might be inclusive classroom support, right? I have two students with IEPs and I just need more support. Again, this could be related to a paraprofessional. Perhaps they feel they didn't receive enough training to support students with disabilities. Perhaps they see that, because of limited funding, students aren't receiving that one-on-one paraprofessional or they aren't receiving the AAC device, which shouldn't be happening, hopefully, but funding could be an issue, right? Or perhaps students, they see the poor post-school outcomes for students with disabilities, so they really want to focus on transition services. So have them brainstorm, have them work with a partner to identify a problem that they are seeing in the schools. And then share with them the hook, line, sinker method. So you are going to hook the person, right? Share who you are and why this issue matters to you. And then you're going to provide a story or data, statistics about the problem. So why is this a problem? Again, a lot of these students are in a placement, so they can directly share information or share a story of a time a paraprofessional was out and how that impacted students and how that impacted themselves as a teacher. And then you're going to ask the legislator for their position or action on the issue. For example, hello, my name is, I'm a student studying special education or a pre-service special education teacher. I've seen firsthand the impact of paraprofessional shortages in classrooms. Students with disabilities often go without needed support. For example, I have a student that XYZ. Can you share what steps you are taking to address this issue? So again, keep it short and simple. I highly recommend that they share a story that really resonated with them, that really impacts why this is a problem. Optional action. So you can have students submit the example of letter or phone script to you, right? And that is that, or simply by you walking around, that's how they are participating in this activity. And this is completely optional action where you ask them, now after this class, you can send your letter to their representative, you can call your representative. This is completely optional. Again, if you plan to send your letter, here are some websites that can help you identify your representatives. Here are also example of advocacy organizations. If you want to become more familiar with different advocacy efforts, here are some organizations. And then I want you to have students reflect on this activity. So how did you feel? How did it feel to prepare and communicate your message? What did you learn about advocacy and government processes? How might you continue to advocate for disability rights in the future? Again, this is optional conversation or reflection, but really have students to think about, the advocacy process. And here is a list of resources and some links and the references. At the beginning of the presentation was a QR code. So if you have a phone, you can access this link. I will also provide the link to my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions via email. Again, thank you for taking the time to view this presentation.